I had protected generals. I had protected nobles. I had protected military commanders important enough to become targets. But protecting a king was different. Especially this king. The first thing I noticed about King Jaden was that he worked too much. The second thing I noticed was that he barely slept. The third thing I noticed was that nobody seemed to realize how lonely he was. It had been 4 days since I became his personal guard. 4 days of standing beside him during council meetings. 4 days of accompanying him through palace corridors. 4 days of watching powerful men twice his age question every decision he made. The kingdom saw a king. I saw a 23-year-old carrying responsibilities that would have crushed most grown men. And somehow he still remained kind. That was the part one understood the least. Most rulers became hard, cruel, suspicious, arrogant. Jaden was none of those things. Even when frustrated, he remained polite. Even when exhausted, he listened. Even when angry, he controlled himself. Frankly, it was impressive, and perhaps a little concerning, because people like that tended to give too much of themselves away. The alliance with Nephite presents tremendous opportunities. Across the table, several nobles nodded enthusiastically. King Jaden remained perfectly composed. Only someone paying close attention would notice the tension in his shoulders, or the way his fingers tightened around the armrest, or the tiny flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Fortunately for him, nobody seemed to be paying attention. Unfortunately for him, I was. My king, Lord Oral smiled. The princess is expected by tomorrow afternoon. A collective murmur swept through the room. Excitement, anticipation, relief. Everyone appeared pleased. Everyone except the king. Interesting. Very interesting. Because this marriage proposal should have been excellent news. Princess Kiara was beautiful, influential, and politically valuable, at least according to the rumors. Most young kings would have welcomed such an arrangement. Jaden looked as though he were being sentenced to prison. My king, Lord Oral repeated. Jaden blinked. For a moment he appeared almost surprised to find himself still in the meeting. Then he offered a polite smile. As I've already stated, the princess is welcome here. The answer satisfied no one. I could tell. The nobles wanted enthusiasm. They wanted certainty. They wanted reassurance. Instead, they received diplomacy. After another 20 minutes, the meeting finally ended. The council members departed. Some discussing wedding preparations. Others discussing trade agreements. Most discussing the future queen. I remained near the doorway as Jaden gathered several documents from the table. He looked tired. More tired than usual. Roland noticed it too. The chief of staff waited until everyone else left before approaching. You survived. Jaden snorted. Barely. That bad. Worse. Roland laughed. The king rubbed his forehead. How many more meetings about Princess Kiara must I endure? Approximately all of them. The look Jaden gave him was almost enough to make me smile. Almost. Roland continued. On the bright side, tomorrow everyone will be discussing her in person. I'm not sure that's an improvement. The older man chuckled. Then his attention shifted toward me. Kelo. Sir. His Majesty intends to review preparations for the arrival ceremony. I nodded. Understood. Jaden stood. Let's get this over with. The three of us left the council chamber. The palace buzzed with activity. Servants hurried through hallways carrying flowers. Decorators hung banners representing both kingdoms. Musicians rehearsed for the welcoming celebration. Everywhere I looked, preparations were underway. The entire palace seemed determined to impress one princess. As we walked, people bowed to the king. Jaden acknowledged every single one. Servants, guards, kitchen workers, stable hands, all of them. A small gesture, easy to overlook. Yet most rulers ignored people beneath their station. Jaden never did. The observation lingered in my mind. Not because it mattered strategically, because it felt genuine. Eventually we reached the eastern courtyard. Workers decorated the entrance where the Nephite delegation would arrive. The king inspected everything carefully. As expected, he took his responsibilities seriously, sometimes too seriously. After nearly an hour of inspections, Roland was summoned elsewhere, leaving only the king and me. The silence between us lasted several minutes. Comfortable, unexpectedly so. Then Jaden sighed. A long, exhausted sigh. I glanced toward him. His attention remained fixed on the courtyard. You dislike this. The words escaped before I could stop them. His eyebrows lifted. For a moment, I wondered whether I had crossed a line. Then he laughed softly. Was I that obvious? only to someone paying attention. That earned another smile. A genuine one. Not the polite version he used during court functions. For some reason, I preferred this smile. Less guarded. More real. I don't dislike Princess Kiara, he said. I don't even know her. His gaze drifted toward the distant city beyond the palace walls. I dislike feeling as though the decision has already been made. I understood. More than he probably realized. My entire childhood had been defined by decisions made by other people. Where I lived. Where I trained. Where I served. Duty rarely left room for personal choice. You could refuse. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew how foolish they sounded. Jaden laughed. A real laugh this time. Could I? No. Exactly. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Then his expression softened. You know, most people here tell me what I should do. I frowned. That's because you're the king. Perhaps. He looked toward me. But you don't. I wasn't sure how to answer. Because he was right. My duty wasn't to advise him. My duty was to protect him. That distinction mattered. Eventually he smiled. Thank you. The simple words caught me off guard. Most kings didn't thank their guards. Most kings barely acknowledged them. Jaden thanked people constantly. It was strange, and strangely difficult to ignore. The following day arrived faster than expected. By noon, the palace was overflowing with visitors. Nobles, merchants, foreign diplomats. Everyone wanted to witness Princess Kiara's arrival. I stood near the front gates with the royal guard. The king waited beside me, dressed in formal royal attire. Gold embroidery, dark blue cloak, silver crown. He looked every bit the ruler people expected. Yet standing close enough to hear him breathe, I noticed something else. Nervousness. Not fear. Not anxiety. Just uncertainty. A trumpet sounded. The delegation had arrived. The massive gates opened. Dozens of mounted soldiers entered first. Nephite banners fluttered in the afternoon breeze. Behind them came noble carriages. Advisors. Servants. Officials. Then finally the royal carriage. The entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. The carriage door opened. Princess Kiara stepped out. The rumors had not exaggerated. She was beautiful. Dark hair. Confident posture. Elegant clothing. More importantly, she carried herself like someone accustomed to power. Not arrogance. Confidence. A significant difference. The princess approached. King Jaden stepped forward. For a moment, everyone watched. Waiting. Judging. Analyzing. The princess curtsied. Your Majesty. Jaden bowed his head politely. Princess Kiara. When she looked up, a smile appeared. Not forced. Not political. Genuine. Interesting. Because the king smiled back. And for the first time since discussions of this marriage began, he looked slightly less miserable. Perhaps this alliance would not be the disaster he feared. Perhaps. Yet as applause filled the courtyard, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Instinct. The same instinct that had kept me alive through years of military service. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. Nothing appeared unusual. The guards were positioned correctly. The guests were screened. The perimeter was secure. Everything looked normal. Yet the feeling remained. A warning. Quiet. Persistent. Danger rarely announced itself. It waited. Watched. Prepared. And I had learned never to ignore my instincts. As the welcoming procession entered the palace, I scanned the crowd once more. Most faces blurred together. Nobles. Servants. Guests. Then I noticed someone. A servant. Nothing unusual about that. Except for one detail. The servant wasn't watching the princess. Or the king. Or the ceremony. He was watching the palace entrances. Studying them. Memorizing them. And when he realized I was looking at him, he immediately turned away. My instincts sharpened. Something was definitely wrong. And for the first time since arriving at the palace, I suspected my assignment might be more complicated than protecting a lonely young king. Experience had taught me to trust my instincts. Instinct had kept me alive on battlefields. It had warned me about ambushes. It had warned me about traitors. It had warned me about men who smiled too easily and lied too well. And right now, instinct was telling me that the servant I had seen in the courtyard wasn't there by accident. The problem was that I had no proof. Only a feeling. A feeling wasn't enough to accuse someone, especially inside a royal palace. So I did what I had been trained to do. I watched. The welcoming ceremony lasted another hour. Princess Kiara was introduced to important nobles. The king escorted her through the palace. Servants rushed back and forth carrying luggage and gifts from Nephite. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. Several times I searched the crowd for the servant. Each time he was gone, by the time evening arrived, the palace had transformed for the royal banquet. Hundreds of candles illuminated the grand hall. Musicians played near the western balcony. Nobles filled the room, wearing their finest clothing. Laughter echoed across polished marble floors. To most people, it probably looked beautiful. To me, it looked like a security nightmare. Too many guests. Too many exits. Too many places for someone to hide. I stood near the king's table while the banquet began. My attention remained divided between the room and the king. Mostly the room. Occasionally the king. Professional reasons, of course. Mostly. The king sat beside Princess Kiara. I expected awkwardness. Instead, I found myself surprised. The two spoke easily, comfortably. At one point the princess laughed at something he said. A genuine laugh. Not the forced politeness nobles usually displayed. Jaden looked surprised by it. Then amused. Interesting. Because for the first time since arriving at court, I saw the king relax. The tension that usually lived in his shoulders eased slightly. The careful mask he wore around the council disappeared. For a few moments, he simply looked like a young man speaking with a friend. The realization struck me unexpectedly. I had spent nearly a week observing him, and yet I wasn't sure I'd ever truly seen him smile until now. Your Majesty. Princess Kiara's voice carried across the table. I must admit something. Jaden raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. She grinned. It probably is. Several nobles nearby leaned closer. Curious. Always curious, and the princess lowered her voice slightly. When I agreed to this visit, I expected someone very different. The king looked amused. Should I be concerned? Possibly. The princess tilted her head. The stories made you sound terrifying. I nearly choked. Terrifying? The king laughed. Actually laughed. Several nearby nobles looked startled. Apparently, they weren't accustomed to hearing it either. Terrifying? Jaden repeated. That seems unlikely. I agree. The princess smiled. You seem entirely too reasonable. Their conversation continued. Easy. Natural. The council members looked pleased. Very pleased. Lord Oral especially. The old noble watched them with the satisfaction of a man convinced his plans were working perfectly. Something about that expression bothered me. Not enough to justify suspicion, but enough to remember. The evening continued. Music, dancing, political discussions. Exactly what one would expect from a royal banquet. Then I saw him. The servant. For a brief moment he appeared near one of the side entrances. His head remained lowered. His movements careful, deliberate. He wasn't serving food. He wasn't carrying messages. He wasn't performing any obvious task. Instead, he seemed to be watching, observing, just as he had earlier. The moment I noticed him, he turned away and disappeared through a side corridor. My instincts immediately sharpened. There. Finally. A lead. I glanced toward the king. Jaden remained engaged in conversation with Princess Kiara, surrounded by guards. Safe. For now. Quietly, I moved away from the banquet hall. The corridor beyond was empty. The servant was nowhere in sight. Most people would have given up. I didn't. Years of military training had taught me to notice details. A scuff mark. A partially open door. A recent footprint. Small clues often revealed larger truths. Several seconds later, I spotted movement ahead. The servant. Moving quickly. Too quickly. And heading in a direction that immediately raised concern. The restricted wing. Only authorized personnel were permitted there. Servants had no reason to enter. None whatsoever. I followed. Carefully. Silently. The palace corridors grew darker the farther we traveled. The sounds of the banquet faded behind us. Soon only distant music remained. The servant glanced behind him once. Twice. Nervous. Very nervous. Eventually, he reached a narrow staircase. Without hesitation, he descended. I followed several moments later. The staircase led toward a series of storage rooms rarely used by palace staff. Why would a servant be here? The answer arrived almost immediately. He wasn't alone. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead. Low. Urgent. Whispered. I moved closer. Close enough to listen. Arrival changes nothing. A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Another responded. What about the marriage? It proceeds as planned. My attention sharpened. Marriage? Princess Kiara? What exactly were they discussing? I stepped closer. Unfortunately, one of the floorboards creaked. The sound echoed through the corridor. The voices stopped immediately. Damn. A heartbeat later, footsteps erupted ahead. I cursed silently and gave chase. The corridor twisted sharply. The figures disappeared around a corner. By the time I reached it, they were gone. I searched every nearby room. Nothing. No people. No evidence. Nothing except frustration. For several moments I stood there listening. Complete silence. Then something caught my attention. A piece of cloth. Small. Torn. Caught on the edge of a wooden crate. I picked it up. Dark blue fabric. Expensive. Far too expensive for an ordinary servant. I slipped it into my pocket. Then continued searching. A few minutes later I discovered something else. A symbol. Carved into the underside of a nearby table. Small enough to escape casual notice. Deliberate enough to be significant. I knelt beside it, studying the mark. 3 intersecting lines surrounding a crown. Recognition hit immediately, because I had seen it before. Not recently. Years ago, during military service. The symbol belonged to House Valeries, one of the oldest noble families in the kingdom. Powerful, wealthy, influential, and supposedly loyal to the crown. So why was their symbol hidden inside a restricted section of the palace? The answer wasn't obvious, but it couldn't be good. I stared at the mark, thinking, analyzing, trying to fit the pieces together. A suspicious servant, secret meetings, discussions about the marriage, a hidden noble symbol. None of it made sense. Yet somehow I knew it was connected. The question was how. Eventually, I returned to the banquet. The celebration was beginning to end. Guests were departing. Servants were cleaning. Musicians were packing away their instruments. Near the center of the room, the king and Princess Kiara remained in conversation. The princess appeared animated. The king looked amused. Again, that surprised me. Not because he was smiling, because he seemed comfortable. For once, as though he didn't need to carry the entire kingdom alone. An odd feeling settled in my chest. One I couldn't quite identify. Perhaps relief. Perhaps approval. Whatever it was, it disappeared the moment Jaden noticed me. There you are. The king approached. Concern flickered briefly across his expression. I was beginning to wonder where you'd gone. The comment caught me off guard. A king noticing the absence of a guard wasn't unusual. A king sounding genuinely concerned about it was. I was checking security. Not entirely a lie. Jaden nodded. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. You found something. I almost smiled. The man was more observant than people gave him credit for. Perhaps. That sounds concerning. It may be nothing. The king looked unconvinced. So did I? Unfortunately, I needed evidence before presenting accusations. Especially accusations involving noble houses. Eventually Princess Kiara joined us. She studied me for a moment. Curious. Evaluating. Then she smiled. You must be Sir Kelo. Your Highness. The princess's smile widened. I've heard quite a lot about you. My eyebrows lifted. From whom? Before I could ask, Jaden looked suddenly interested in the floor. Interesting. The princess clearly noticed it too, and judging by her expression, she found it hilarious. Thankfully, she chose not to elaborate. For now, after a few more polite exchanges, the evening finally ended. The king retired to his chambers. The princess returned to her guest suite. The palace gradually grew quiet. Most people slept peacefully. I did not. Instead, I sat alone in my quarters. The torn piece of cloth resting on my desk. Beside it, a rough sketch of the symbol I had discovered. House Valeries, one of the crown's oldest allies. What were they doing in a restricted corridor? Why were strangers discussing the royal marriage? And why did a servant seem involved? Too many questions. Not enough answers. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I reached for my dagger automatically. Years of habit. Enter. One of the palace guards stepped inside. Sir, what is it? The guard hesitated. As requested, I looked into the servant you described. Immediately my attention sharpened. And the guard swallowed. We can't find him. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What do you mean? No records. No assignments. No identification. The guard looked uneasy. It's as if he never existed. Silence filled the room. Slowly, I looked back toward the symbol on my desk. The feeling I'd experienced all day returned. Stronger now. Sharper. Danger. Not a possibility. A certainty. Someone had infiltrated the palace. Someone connected to a powerful noble house. And whatever they were planning, it involved the king. I stared into the darkness beyond my window. One thought repeating itself again and again. This wasn't over. It was only beginning.